So good morning and welcome to chapter 10 then of this set of classes. Just let me get this timer started. And a continuation of the set of chapters on migration, inclusion, diversity. Now, Britain, the United Kingdom, as I mentioned, is very well known for being a diverse country, and recently, quite recently, but in the last 10, 15 years, putting this forward as an element of Britishness, being proud to be diverse. And perhaps you remember I mentioned the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in 2012, that moment when it was possible to show all the things that the government wanted to, the authorities wanted to put forward as typical of Britain, and multiculturalism was in the center of this. What I'm going to do in the next few chapters is look at the main waves of immigration, main types of immigration in the United Kingdom. Now, not all of them, because the ones which hit the headlines are not all of them. For example, it's very rare to read articles and news items about the Chinese immigration to Britain, which is nevertheless quite sizable. And indeed, the immigrations we read about tend to be, with some exceptions, tend to be about those which have come from ex-colonies and therefore have particularly had to deal with racism and anti-racism and so on. That's what puts the question of immigration into the public eye. So in the next chapters, I'm going to go through one by one: Jewish immigration, then Irish immigration, then Southeast Asian immigration, then Caribbean immigration, not because that's all the kinds of immigration, but I think between the four of them, they bring up the major questions. So let's start with a short history of Jewish immigration. And first of all, the Jewish community in Britain today, I'm pretty sure it's the second biggest in Europe after France. And here is a series of some of the main Jewish religious organizations in the United Kingdom today. The biggest one, then the United Synagogue, which actually was founded in 1870 in London, and today is the biggest of the religious organizations, and is under the leadership of a chief rabbi. However, it is true that this organization is often criticized for representing only Orthodox believers and not wider ones. Another group, then, Reform Judaism, is a more liberal religious organization. So, for example, some of the in Reform Judaism and liberal Judaism also, you will have a bigger role for women, and the Masorti synagogues are the smallest organization, and they have remained more traditional. So what else do I have here? Yeah, otherwise there are organizations such as the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which was founded in 1760. So this is not something new. And this contains representatives from each synagogue. And there's a number of other organizations such as the Union of Jewish Students. And I think I already mentioned the newspaper, but I'll mention it again in a moment. So according to the 2011 census, 263,000 people answered Jewish to the voluntary question on religion. So every 10 years, there's a census, as in many countries. And one of the questions which is asked is, what is your religion? And of course, you can say, I'm not telling anybody, or you can choose from a long list of religions. Now, this is something very English, because in France, my feeling is that, well, first of all, I know that they do not ask this question because it's considered to be your private life. But also, I get the feeling that if they did ask it, a lot of people would say, oh, no, I'd rather not say. Whereas the British are much more explicit about who they are, and so it's no problem. Another of the questions in the census is, what ethnic group do you belong to? Are you white, black, Asian, and they ask people to self-identify as belonging to this particular group. So there's something very, very British about all this way of doing this. So 263,000 people. Now that may be, you have to add those people who said, oh, well, I'd rather not say, but nevertheless, who think of themselves as Jewish. The Jewish community in Britain has a newspaper which isn't supposed to represent all Jews, but which talks about Jewish issues. This is the Jewish Chronicle, and I've chosen here a couple of front pages which are perhaps not the most political, because the Jewish Chronicle, as in many countries, has become involved in a large number of discussions and debates which are not about Jews in Britain, but which are about Israel and Palestine. And so I've chosen ones which are not about that. So this one, as you can see, the front page is saying how successful 16-year-old students taking the GCSE were coming from Jewish school. There's a certain number of Jewish schools in Britain. Remember, there's nothing surprising about this because Catholic schools and Protestant schools are also part of the state system. They're not private schools. And so here you have then the results of Jewish schools at the exams when you're 16 years old. I think that the Jewish Chronicle is a weekly. And here we have another one. Then talking about the treatment of old people and the problems that old people can face, either when they are in homes or sometimes also in the family. So you can, and they're looking at how does this affect older Jewish people. So this newspaper, then you can find the website if you want to have a look at what sort of things they talk about, talks to the Jewish community in Britain. Now, in Britain, as in elsewhere, there is a problem with, in particular, from the far right, as being anti-Jewish. And here you have an article that shows that says that anti-Semitic incidents hit a new high in 2019, and they recorded 1,805 incidents. Okay. Most of these involving abusive behavior, graffiti, or abuse on social media. So that is to say, so it's not a mass phenomenon, but it's something which is a regular problem for the Jewish community. Here you see just anecdotal pictures. Then the East London Synagogue, one of the more beautiful synagogues there. So let's go back a little bit into the history of Jews in Britain. There've always been Jews in Britain. Well, that's not quite true, but probably the earliest ones came in the 11th century. That is after the Norman Conquest, 1066 and all that. And they were often restricted to particular jobs, and in particular because medieval Christianity said you must not lend money out for interest. That's not Christian. This has changed since. Then a section of the Jews specialized in being small-scale bankers and lenders and so on. And they were often blamed for things going wrong. And indeed, the medieval Jewish community was expelled in 1290. So in the 13th century, all the Jews were made to leave. They were told to leave or convert to Christianity. That was also an option. This happened in a number of countries in Europe, in Spain, I know. I don't know, I'm not an expert in this question, but this was where the Jewish community were pushed into particular roles in the economy and then blamed when people didn't like what was going on. A small community remained in Britain, more or less in hiding, but in fact, nothing. The next episode is 1656. 1656, so the 17th century. This is when Oliver Cromwell is the leader of the British states. Oliver Cromwell, then the representative of those who executed the King Charles, won the Civil War in the name of parliamentary power and not royal power. And really, this is what we refer to as the English Civil War, or sometimes the English Revolution. And they reorganized the way that the country was run, and also the ideas that the country was run on. And at the time, remember, very important at the time, religion and politics were the same thing. That is to say, people who wanted to say, oh, I think society should be run differently, they would typically say, God told me that God wants society run differently. This is how religion worked with politics at the time. And in any case, to cut a long story short, the Cromwell's victory for Parliament was also a tremendous victory for Protestantism. Established both the Church of England and the more radical Protestant groups, dissenters, and so on. And Oliver Cromwell, wanting to stabilize the situation, was obliged to make a compromise between the different kinds of Protestants. There was a general agreement that you must not allow Catholicism because they were probably going to help Spain invaders or something like that. And so, but nevertheless, there was a real need for a relatively tolerant attitude to different Protestants. And so they declared the end of religious discrimination, or rather the end of religious discrimination except against Catholics. And the reason for this was to unite the Protestants, or to stabilize the situation about Protestants. But accidentally, this also allowed Jews to come back in because they were no longer banned. And so a number of Dutch Jews did come back into the country. And here you can see 1657, this is a commemorative plaque for the site of the first synagogue after the resettlement, and the resettlement that's coming back to Britain. They were allowed to, they were given more and more rights little by little. So in 1723, a special law said Jews are allowed to own land. And there is a special concession. Normally, when you signed to take on ownership of land, you had to sign upon the faith of a Christian. And this new law said that Jews were not obliged to do this. So a fairly small community of Jews, but nevertheless, not that small, grew in the 18th and the 19th century, and they faced fewer legal restrictions and enjoyed more religious freedom than in most countries of Europe. And so that was the situation in the 18th and 19th. Nevertheless, there were still limits, and going into the universities, into the army, or even joining the City of London, you had to do it you had to sign an oath on my faith as a Christian, on the true faith of a Christian. And so Jews had two choices. Either they considered, oh, well, this is just a formality. And although everybody knew they were Jews and they were not hiding it, they just signed on the true faith of a Christian, and there you go. But or they could, or they were obliged to find work in other fields. So little by little, there were fewer barriers. And in 1835, you had the first Jewish barrister. And the same year, the 1835, David Salomons was elected sheriff of the City of London. So we had a Jewish sheriff, and 20 years later, he became Lord Mayor. So there was 1837, a Jewish gentleman, Moses Montefiore, was knighted by Queen Victoria. So we saw a certain integration of a section of the Jewish elite into the general elite. Yeah, this is not to say that anti-Semitism disappeared, of course. And one by one, you had the change in the laws. Jews were able to graduate from Cambridge University after 1856 and from Oxford University in 1871. In Parliament, very often, you had a certain number of Jewish members of Parliament who generally were baptized. That is, that they felt themselves to be Jewish, but because it was a condition to be baptized, they got baptized. And the most well known and the most potent symbol was Benjamin Disraeli, who became a member of parliament in 1837. Now, he made no secrets of his Jewish origins, but his father had decided to have him baptized because he thought, well, if he's not baptized, he will never be successful in society. And indeed, he was very successful and became prime minister in 1868. This was just after the Parliamentary Oaths Act of 1866, where it was abolished. This wording, "on my true faith as a Christian," was abolished, and therefore it was free for Jews to become members of Parliament. Now, the next episode is towards the end of the 19th century, where horrific pogroms against Jews in Russia and in Eastern Europe led Jewish families to try to take refuge in England or in the United States, helped by the fact that these days there were now the big passenger ships, and so that it was possible, which were relatively cheap, and so it was possible to move, and there were huge numbers of Jews leaving that part of the world. Very often they were very poor, or often indeed extremely poor, and they would sometimes get exploited by the transporters. There are a number of cases of Jews being told they were being taken to New York, and then they just left them in Liverpool. And it took them actually quite a moment to know they weren't in New York. Remember, people did not have the education that they had today. They couldn't use their GPS to check. So during the closing decades of the 19th century, you had then more and more Jewish immigrants coming into Britain. Now, the established Jews were not always, were quite divided about this. They had managed to get themselves a relatively stable place within society, but they were very aware that anti-Semitism still existed. And so you had some Jews who were welcoming to the newcomers and establishing charitable works like this one you can see on the picture, Jews Temporary Shelter, and it's written in English and Hebrew, I think, although it could be Yiddish, I wouldn't know. And they, so this was established in 1885 to take some of these Jewish immigrants who would arrive with nothing at all, nothing to eat, and nothing, and just desperately trying to find work. And so there was a certain, and of course, great dangers of Jewish girls becoming prostitutes because it was the only thing they could do to eat. On the other hand, some sections of the Jewish establishment in Britain were unhappy about the arrival of these immigrants, because now we're quite a respectable community, and these people who are coming, you know, some of them are criminals. But, you know, when people have nothing to eat, they are not always too worried about that. The Jewish Board of Guardians was established in 1859 to help the foreign poor who arrived, and I think this is this is a shelter connected with that. Also in 1885, the Jewish Association for the Protection of Girls and Women was founded to protect women from being drawn into prostitution, and that they also opened a safe house where Jewish women could go and stay for a few weeks or a few months. Now, the arrival of this large number of Jews, remember, it was very easy to arrive at the time. You didn't need a passport. This was considered to be not necessary because for a long time, so few people had traveled, and the new ease of traveling with the passenger ships was quite new, as I said. And so at the time, if you arrived, you were allowed to come in. But this did lead to the first campaigns against immigrants and in defense of immigrants. So first of all, this is in defense of immigrants. This is a poster for a mass meeting by the International Working Men's Educational Club. And so you can see that this is very much about inclusion and diversity. And they had this meeting then to protest against the persecution of Jews in Russia, and said that this is our are worried too, and some of the speakers are very well known. There is Mrs. Eleanor Marx. This is Karl Marx's daughter, and a number of other people. William Morris, the well-known artist, and so on and so forth. You can see the number of speakers they had. They had very long meetings at the time. But remember, there was no competition from radio, record player, or television, or cinema, and so it was easier to get a large number of people into a long political meeting. So this is a situation when between 1880 and 1914, around 1 million Jewish migrants arrived in the British ports of Grimsby, Hull, Hartlepool, Newcastle, and Southampton. And many of them were hoping to go on to New York, Buenos Aires, or Cape Town, but quite often it was not so easy to move on, and they settled in Britain. So you saw this poster, which shows a campaign to defend Jews, and here you have a campaign to limit immigration. So this is one of the first campaigns against immigration. I don't think there was one before that. A great public demonstration under the auspices of the British Brothers League. It doesn't sound too left-wing, does it? In favor of restricting the further immigration of destitute foreigners into this country. So destitute foreigners at the time, everybody knew they were talking about Jews. And the meeting was held at the People's Palace in Mile End in East London, so on Tuesday, January the 14th, 1902. And it was going to be addressed by a member of Parliament, several members of Parliament, and also ministers of religion. So obviously this organization was looking for respectability. Now, interestingly enough, they are campaigning to limit immigration, and they were successful a couple of years later. The very first laws against immigration were passed. But at the time, this was really quite an extreme position to stop immigration. And you can see the poster, which shows the proud Britain being really mean and stopping these Jews from coming into the country. And this would be, in some circles, really quite shocking at the time. Now, many of the Jewish immigrants settled in the poorest parts of town, the East End of London, the Leylands in Leeds, Strangeways in Manchester, and the Gorbals in Glasgow. And by 1900, many of the streets in East London and some other cities were entirely Jewish. They spoke Yiddish, the European language of Jews. They wore different clothes, they had different food, and so on. Now, by settling in these tight-knit communities, as most migrant communities often do, they could retain their culture and protect each other. Now, these were areas which were already very poor and overcrowded. And the Jewish community survived mostly by making clothes. Yeah, the clothes industry was huge at the time. Remember, today, most of our clothes are made in a factory in Vietnam or China. But at the time, every single, almost all clothes were made by hands or with simple machines. And the Jewish tailors and the Jewish dressmakers were very, very numerous. It says here that at the time there was even in East London a herd of cows that supplied kosher milk. Here you have just a little bit of a document to illustrate this. This is a marriage certificate from London, 1904. And at the time, then there were the shop signs and the posters would be in Yiddish. There were several Yiddish language newspapers in London. And books, and Yiddish theater was very successful. There was a long tradition of Jewish theater. Remember, at the time, theater in general is much more important. By 1904, you're beginning to get the first cinemas, and of course, you've got to have the music hall. But nevertheless, theater remains far more important today and far less reserved to the elite. So from the late 1890s, the Pavilion Theater showed Yiddish language plays, and Yiddish theater was its principal attraction from 1906 until 1935, Yiddish Theater. So here we are right in the center of diversity in the first half of the 20th century. So lots of children, of course, and there was a certain number of Jewish schools established. Most Jewish immigrants' children left school at 14 to find work because they certainly didn't have the money for higher education until after the First World War. Now, the work in the clothing industry was often badly paid and did not have very good working conditions. And so there was a strong tradition of trade unions, and I will be talking about that in a moment. But first of all, another element of the Jewish parts of London at the first half of the 20th century. First of all, I was talking about theatre. This is in English, but this is a Jewish playwright living in London at the time, Israel Zangwill, and he wrote this play, The Melting Pot, the Great American Drama. And what is interesting about this is that it is the, what's the word? It is the origin of this expression, the melting pot. This expression did not exist before. And as you can see, what the idea of the melting pot originally was, here you have the cauldron, which is the United States of America, and all these people come from many, many different countries and are melted down to become something completely different, American, the melting pot. Yeah, so I was mentioning that the working conditions and the pay could be extremely hard in the clothing industry. And so this encouraged many Jewish immigrants to join trades unions. So from the 1870s onwards, separate Jewish trades unions were formed in tailoring, baking, cabinet making, and other trades. And here you have a banner from the Trouser Makers Union, and you can see that half of it is written in English and the other half is not written in English. And it's a very typical trades union banner from the time, 1882. This is with very idealistic slogans. We are marching towards the morning. We're struggling, comrades all. Our aims are set on victory. Our enemies must fall. With ordered step and flag unfurled, we'll build a new and better world. Yes, at the time, the trade unions were very radical. It was also very dangerous to be a member of the trade union, very, very radical. This is the same spirit as the industrial workers of the world at the same time in Chicago or in New York. These parts of Eastern London also, I have a bit more about the trade unions first. It was rather difficult for the unions to achieve much success because unfortunately for them, there were always a plentiful supply of people willing to work for very, very low wages. The immigrants who arrived were so desperate that it was very difficult for them to insist on better conditions. Nevertheless, there were big strikes. In 1889, 6,000 Jewish tailoring workers were involved on a strike for a whole month. They were demanding the 12-hour day. They didn't want to work a 15-hour day. They wanted to work a 12-hour day. And in 1912, more than 10,000 workers were involved in better paying conditions. These trade unions are very typically at the time were very elaborate. They have their special union costumes, special union and so on and so forth. Of course, in 1914, the First World War broke out, and that was the end of immigration for a while. At least 50,000 British Jews joined the armed service, and like the rest of their fellows, many of them died. And one of the cultural results of the First World War, which is very well known in Britain, is the First World War poets. That in fact, the most popular poets in Britain today are those who wrote about what it was like to be a soldier in the First World War. I'm not quite sure why this should be. In any case, one of them was a London Jew, Isaac Rosenberg. That's a painting of him. And here you can see a couple of his collections of poems by Isaac Rosenberg. And I have just one of them here. The troop ship, so the soldiers on a ship moving from A to B. And this is what he felt about it. I chose this one because it is short. Grotesque and queerly huddled contortionists to twist the sleepy soul to a sleep. We lie all sorts of ways and cannot sleep. The wet wind is so cold and the lurching men so careless that should you drop to a doze, winds fumble or men's feet are on your face. Okay, just a little slice of experience there. Also, among the Jewish ghetto artists, you have the painter, Mark Gertler, and you can see here he has his blue plaque. The Greater London Council's put up a blue plaque for him. Now, he left school in 1906 and went to art school, but unfortunately his family was very poor, and so he had to stop that and begin to work at a glass company. But by evening classes, he managed to advance and got a scholarship from the Jewish Education Aid Society and was able to continue his studies as an artist. So, and he became relatively well known. Here's one of his paintings. I don't have time to show you very many more. So I'm going to continue with a few more examples of well-known British Jews, because I often feel that when we study ethnic groups, minority ethnic groups, we quite rightly explain how badly treated they were, but we sometimes forget to underline the great contributions. So we have, for example, one of the best-known modern British playwrights, Harold Pinter, Jewish. His best-known plays include The Birthday Party and Betrayal, and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2005. He's also well known for organizing with Jews for Justice for Palestinians. Among other important British Jewish figures, Lucian Freud, who there was an exhibition of his in Paris not so long ago, and I probably, if you were in my L3 classes last year, you have heard of him, and this famous portrait of the Queen, renowned around the world, this portrait, because it shows her as human and not idealized, and nobody knows if she liked it or not, but she may have done. Oscar Kakoshka, then, who was born in 1886 and died in 1880, was another. He had to come to Britain. I'm pretty sure that he came in the 30s because of Jewish oppression. And one of the things I like about Kakoshka is that he continued painting until he was like 90 something. Many children of Jewish immigrants got involved in the entertainment business, and Joe Loss is one of the best known big band leaders from the 40s and 50s, and there you go, there he is. Among the novelists, Arthur Koestler. Among the British Jews, he wrote a whole series of novels, not so famous really, but I do recommend them. They're really worth a go. I think I can't remember any other titles right now. Within the acting profession, one of the great comic actors of the 50s and 60s, Peter Sellers, well known for playing in Inspector Clouseau, who is a ridiculous Frenchman in the movies and allows the English people to laugh at the French. I can't understand why they would want to do that. And more recently, you may well know the exciting but then tragic story of Amy Winehouse among British Jews. Last example of British Jews here, one of the leaders of the extreme left, of the revolutionary left in Britain for a long time, the sort of Olivier Besancenot of Britain, although obviously he's older, was Tony Cliff, his original name, Gail Gluckstein. He was born in 1917 in Palestine, before the founding of Israel, and he came to Britain as a refugee, and then for Ireland for a while, and he built one of the biggest revolutionary left parties, the Socialist Workers' Party. one of the impressive things about the guy is that his English was dreadful from the beginning to the end of his life. He made many mistakes in grammar and pronunciation, and yet he managed to become a well-known orator on the left. So that was an extremely rapid summary of some aspects of Jewish immigration to Britain. I don't have time to do very much more than that, but I do recommend this documentary series. If you have time, even if you watch 15 minutes of one of the episodes, that gives you some ideas about diversity in Britain. And this is, I think there's 6 episodes. They're available on YouTube. And this is called Strictly Kosher. And it's a documentary series about the Jewish community in Manchester. About which I knew nothing at all before I to the series, and it opens up a whole series of interesting questions. So I do recommend that. And that's all I have to say. That's all I have time to say about this particular ethnic community then that represents a part of diversity and poses questions of inclusion. Next chapter, I will be moving on to Irish people in Britain, which is another important community, and all this with the aim of giving you some material that I hope you'll be able to exploit within the question of migration, inclusion, and diversity.